Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Doyle, for coming on this ongoing study into SDTC, as the public knows it, the billion-dollar Liberal Green Slush Fund. So I'd like to start with a couple of basic questions, if I could, and thank you for your opening statement. You've just started to go through the process, or you're about to publish the first money or restart the funding. You mentioned the contribution agreement has been revised. Could you please table with this committee the revised contribution agreement and the one that it replaced?
Yes, we'd be happy to do that. Thanks.
Thank you. The questions I have begin with the issue of the money you're about to give. You outlined that the longest that have been waiting in the queue is sort of how you're going to do the priority. Could I ask you, in that analysis, are you determining whether or not they are any one of the companies of the 82% of transactions that the Auditor General reviewed that were conflicted? And keeping in mind that that is an issue for Parliament, that are you taking that as a factor about whether or not they should be moved up the queue or considered as the investigation is ongoing?
Thank you for that question. I'm getting a kind of a feedback from the room there. I should say that
actually,
first.
Ms. Doyle, just hold on. Maybe we'll try to. I've stopped the clock here. You'll get a chance. So, is that better? Are you still picking up some audio feedback?
No, it's more when I speak.
Oh.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, why don't you proceed if you find that it is very disruptive?
I will.
And similarly for the interpreters, if you pick it up as well. So, Ms. Doyle, the floor is yours, please.
Great. Thank you. I wanted to respond by saying that our very first priority for disbursements to our recipients are those companies that were found to have no conflict of interest or eligibility issues by the Auditor General. And so those will be the very first disbursements. But we are reviewing each project and going through this new disbursement assurance quality process before any payment will be made.
Here, so out of that period, there were 226 transactions the Auditor General reviewed, but that period had over 400 transactions. Have you reviewed the other 400 transactions for the conflicts and also eliminated them from the application process at this stage?
As I mentioned, one recommendation of the Auditor General that is still underway is the assessment of each project as she recommended. And so that work is being undertaken by third parties, and that work is underway right now. And we have...
My question is related to the full period of time, because the Auditor General only did a sample of that period of 226 of over 400 transactions. I would hope that you are looking at that would have piqued your curiosity as a board member with your fiduciary responsibility to ensure that all of those files and all of those applications of conflicted companies were being eliminated at this stage from consideration out of the 400, not just the ones the Auditor General named.
The recommendation of the Auditor General was to assess all projects within her audit period for eligibility. And that is the process that we have underway right now using third parties, is that every single project is being reviewed by 2 independent third parties to assess full eligibility.
Who those 2 independent third parties are?
They're consulting companies that we recruited through an RFP. I can provide you with the names of those consulting companies.
Yes, if you could, because we've had accusations from the whistleblower that the third parties that have been used to vet projects before have been conflicted with management.
We do have a reinforced conflict of interest provisions that to ensure that our contractors are not in any way in conflict of interest, sir.
Have you met with the minister since you took over this role?
I have not.
Have any of the board members that you're aware of?
No, not that I'm aware of. I believe none of us have met with.
Have you met with the, and you've met with the president of the NRC in planning the transition?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Prior to the freeze, SDTC published a regular update of every project since its inception that was funded on a spreadsheet that you could download from their website. When you restart funding, will you continue this practice?
I'm sorry, because I'm so recent in this role, I'm not familiar with that practice, but it sounds like the very kind of transparency that we're committed to. So yes, we could do the very same thing, yeah.
Okay. Who is the acting president of SDTC currently?
We do not have an acting president, sir. We have an acting chief operating officer.
And who is that?
That is I'm sorry,
Zaid Rahim?
Zaid Rahim, yes.
And is Zaid Rahim operating full-time in that job right now?
Yes, he is operating full-time. Yes.
Okay, because we've been trying to get him to appear before this committee, and he has been saying he's sick and can't appear. So that's good to know. We will make another attempt to have him appear.
Sir, if I could just correct myself, he is on a medical leave.
So who is
right now?
So who's doing the job?
So our CFO, Cheryl. Yeah, pardon me. I just have to get Cheryl's.
So your
name.
CFO is the acting operating.
Yes, this is the acting COO.
Okay, who's acting then in Mr. Rahim's role of VP of Investments?
I'm sorry, I don't have the list of staff in front of me. Brian Scott is the acting
Okay.
is the acting VP of Investments.
I'll come back to that in another round.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Doyle, just to clarify an answer you provided to a question posed by Mr. Perkins, the reassessment process that is now underway is taking into account all of the projects that were reviewed during the time period of the Auditor General's report, not just the sample of the Auditor General. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Can you provide the assurance that once the reassessment process is completed, that no companies that were involved in conflicts of interest involving board members will receive a further cent from the taxpayer through SDTC?
As I mentioned, we are implementing the Auditor General's recommendation, and we're reviewing every single project on an individual basis. And if we find any evidence of wrongdoing on the part of the recipient, as the legal agreements exist between SDTC and the recipients, then the board will take action on recovery.
And take action on recovery and bar such companies from receiving further funding?
Yes, I would imagine that if there was any finding of wrongdoing, that would disqualify them from future agreements with SDTC.
Now, you spoke about a reinforced contribution agreement that is now in place. Pursuant to that reinforced contribution agreement, are there any projects that would now be eligible for funding that were ineligible under the previous contribution agreements but had nonetheless been approved by the former corrupt SDTC board?
That might be the case. You know, the Act and the contribution agreement had not kept pace with changes in the technology space that we are focused on in clean tech. So there is a possibility with the new contribution agreement that, it was recommended by the Auditor General that we clarify language around eligibility That I would say is a possibility. That
I apologize to interrupt you, Ms. Doyle, and I thank you for that, but I raise it because when the whistleblower appeared before this committee 2 weeks ago, he said that it was more than a possibility. He said that with respect to the reinforced contribution agreement, that it, quote, goes back and retroactively allows for the majority of those ineligible projects to be considered eligible, a majority of ineligible projects. That seems to me to be concerning. It seems to me to be concerning that we have $58 million of money that improperly went out the door, according to the Auditor General, and instead of cleaning up the corruption and mismanagement at SDTC, what is now in fact happening pursuant to the so-called reinforced contribution agreement is that the minister and ISED and the board at SDTC are changing the rules retroactively to invalidate mismanagement and corruption.
Right now, the process is underway to assess the eligibility. So I'm not sure how anyone could speak as the outcome of that process. But I can just give you one example that in the new contribution agreement, we now have much more clear definitions around the technology readiness levels. They hadn't been as clearly defined in the former contribution agreement, and that had posed a challenge around the Auditor General's review of what readiness level was a particular project when it came to being to its eligibility. So, in some cases, the language is now much clearer with clearer definitions of what we mean by the TRLs, as they refer to, technology readiness levels.
Chair, and good afternoon, Ms. Doyle. Thank you for your attendance. Minister Champagne on June the 4th, 2024, issued a press release, and I'm going to quote from that release. He said, effective immediately, SDTC will also resume funding under a reinforced contribution agreement with ISED for eligible projects in a sector vital to our country's economy and clean growth transition. In line with the Auditor General's findings, my department will enhance oversight and monitoring of funding during the transition period. Now, did I hear you correctly in stating that since your appointment in and around June of this year, you have not funded any projects as of date?
We were appointed the very same day as that press release.
There's been no funding since that date?
No, there has been no disbursements made because there needed to be certain recommendations of the Auditor General
thank you.
Implemented. Yeah,
that's fine, ma'am. You confirmed on a number of occasions you have yet to speak to Minister Champagne, correct?
That's correct.
Have you spoke to the Deputy Minister?
Yes, we've had a discussion with the Deputy Minister, and we have other members of the ISED executive who attend each of our board meetings for a period of time for exchange of information and updates.
Okay. So you're sharing information. Are they providing an oversight and monitoring of projects that you are about to fund? Have they weighed in? Have they made an assessment about the appropriateness of that funding?
We have a regular reporting to ISED, and it's under the new contribution agreement. And financial reporting is going back and forth between ISED and SDTC. When it comes to the actual eligibility of the projects, that is our responsibility as the board. And so we've put this process in place, which I've referred to a number of times.
Who are you talking to at ISED besides the Deputy Minister?
We are speaking with the Assistant Deputy Minister, and members of his team, I believe. Yes,
Apply this committee with all those names?
yes, we could.
You mentioned
Yeah.
you're reporting to ISED. Do you know specifically who you are reporting to?
We report in, and I mean, we don't, as a board, report. We're appointed by the minister and serve at the pleasure of the government. But we report. Our reporting goes in to the deputy minister.
Part of the difficulty in the previous rendition of the board of SDTC was information that we learned that the assistant deputy minister of ISED actually sat in on each and every board meeting, had his eyes and ears on all the funding that was conflicted, all the funding that went to Liberal insiders, and whether or not that was passed on up the chain to Minister Champagne still to this day remains a mystery, hence the scandal. You obviously have had a number of board meetings, smaller in nature, since your appointment. Has the assistant deputy minister sat in on those meetings?
The new contribution agreement specifies exactly the nature of the connection between the board and ISED. A member of an assistant deputy minister or his or her representative attends one portion of the board for the strict purpose of exchange of updates and then leaves the board. So they are not present during any of our board business.
How on earth does that enhance oversight when that particular assistant deputy minister merely receives an update and is not privy to ensuring that all the actions and all the decisions you are making are in accordance with the updated contribution agreement? That was the whole purpose behind the old contribution agreement, that there would be some degree of oversight.
Thank you, Mr. Brock.
Am I hearing there's no oversight?
Mr. Doyle, you have the floor, please.
Yeah. The oversight is very well documented now in the new contribution agreement, and it is through a series of reporting. But as an independent agency, as specified under the Act, that the oversight is not done by having a member of the ISED as sitting in on the board, but rather through the regular reporting, both financial and program reporting, to the department.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to ask the witness, if I could, the SDTC had created something called accelerators. Are those companies that were accelerators, project reviews, still in place?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that question. No new applications will be considered under, and the accelerators came under a stream called the ecosystem funding stream. And so one decision the board has taken is to cease funding of the accelerators or under the ecosystem and to not accept any further applications.
So I'm going to go through a scenario, and I appreciate hearing that, to make sure that you're eliminating this from the whole process. Because former chair of SDTC, Annette Vacharen, came to that stream for the Vacharen Center seeking a total of $6.8 million for the Vacharen Center, which was one of those accelerators, which she established at Cape Breton University. That got to the investment committee, which your now acting chief operating officer was involved in, and we have emails from him in his role as VP of Investments, which said, obviously that the conflict was even too much for that group to accept, and it was rejected, but committed an email that SDT staff would help find the Vacharen Center money elsewhere. So the result of that is that on June 9th, 2022, ACOA granted $2 million to the Visharan Center, and I said another $2.5 million. And then in September of 2023, while ISED was investigating SDTC, their regional development agency, ACOA, gave yet another $1 million. And then on September 19th, 2023, the industry department gave them another $3.1 million. So that's a total of almost $9 million of taxpayer money that went, that the whistleblower said staff were involved in trying to find funding for that center elsewhere. And they confirmed that that was a common practice, that staff were tasked with finding other money for these sometimes rejected and sometimes accepted projects in other government departments. Have you stopped the practice of staff being the government relations and slush fund management of the Government of Canada for either rejected or accepted projects on that? It is not SDTC's role to act as the in-house application process for other government departments, is it?
As I've mentioned, Mr. Chair, we have a very particular mandate, and that mandate is to, as I said, go through those three things. But we have, as I mentioned, the ecosystem funding stream has been discontinued, and so
have you curtailed the process of staff acting on behalf of companies that apply to find money in other government departments? And you were a deputy minister in other government departments. So have you stopped that? That seems to me not to be the mandate that Parliament gave the foundation.
I'm not familiar with any practice like that being undertaken.
Well, it means it hasn't stopped then. I'll move to my next thing. The order of the House of Commons was that unredacted documents during that audit period be turned over to the law clerk of the House of Commons. And SDTC, as I understand it, has not fully complied with that. In fact, put in redacted documents. And the Speaker ruled a point of privilege against the House, which we're debating as we speak in the House. Are you, as a board member, ensuring that you comply with the order of the House of Commons to put unredacted documents into the law clerk?
We had directed, and I'm quite certain that it was implemented, that all thousands and thousands of unredacted documents were provided to the law clerk. None of the documents that were provided by SDTC were redacted.
But the full order, according to the law clerk, has not been complied with because not all the documents have come yet.
Well, the
That's in a
documents
letter
that were
from the law clerk to the Speaker.
Our own obligations, I believe, have been fulfilled. At SDTC, there were a number of other agencies that were involved.